If you had asked me then, I would have chosen you." Ruth's voice was barely a whisper, her fingers tracing the child's tiny hand. Naomi looked at her, something flickering in her gaze. Something that had always been there but never spoken aloud. "And if I had asked you now?" The room was silent, but the silence itself spoke volumes. As Naomi held Ruth, she heard the vow once spoken, echoing in her mind like scripture itself. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Ruth 1 verse 16. Naomi had once thought those words a declaration of duty. But now, as she pressed her forehead to Ruth's, she knew the truth. It had always been a declaration of a love that did not fit the expectations of their time. For centuries, this story has been told as one of duty, a woman bound to her mother-in-law by obligation. A bond of survival, nothing more. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if Ruth's choice to stay wasn't just about loyalty? What if it wasn't even about survival? What if it was a love that felt too close, too intimate, one that did not fit within the roles the world expected? A devotion that unsettled, that made people whisper, that carried a closeness no one dared to name. Not the kind that history acknowledges, not the kind that could be spoken aloud in the streets of Bethlehem, but the kind that is written in the spaces between words, in the glances held just a second too long, in the quiet touch of a hand in the dark. The kind the Bible never dared to name. This is the story of Ruth and Naomi, the bond the scriptures could not define. In first meeting, Naomi stood at the threshold, her heart heavy as she watched the two young women standing before her. Ruth met her gaze. Something in her chest tightened. She was supposed to be looking at the sons, the men, the ones they were meant to marry. But Ruth's eyes had already settled on Naomi. And Naomi? She saw her, truly saw her, in a way she hadn't seen anyone since she had been young enough to believe love was something that belonged to her too. The room hummed with low voices, the air thick with the scent of wine and burning oil. But between them, the air felt charged heavy with unspoken tension. Then, without hesitation, Ruth did something unthinkable. She reached for Naomi's hand. A brief touch, a lingering moment. And Naomi didn't pull away. The murmurs around them faded. The men were speaking, but the words didn't matter. In that moment, Ruth made her choice. And Naomi, though she wouldn't understand it until much later, had made hers too. The bond forged in grief. Tragedy struck swiftly, and before they could comprehend its depth, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion were buried beneath Moab's dry earth. Their husbands had been placeholders, a necessity of life rather than the center of it. Now they were gone, and in their absence, something else remained, something unspoken, something neither of them had dared to name while the men still lived. The weight of expectation had died with them, and for the first time, Naomi and Ruth stood in a world where they belonged only to each other. The wind stirred the dust around their feet, carrying away the last remnants of a past they were ready to leave behind. Orpah wept, clinging to the grief she was supposed to feel, but Ruth and Naomi only watched, their silence saying more. Without the men, there was no pretense, no duty to uphold. Naomi turned to the young widows beside her, speaking the words she was expected to say. "Go back to your mother's house." Orpah hesitated, then kissed Naomi's cheek before she disappeared into the distance. But Ruth did not move. Her place was here, and they both knew it. There was nothing left to hold them apart. Naomi could feel Ruth's presence beside her before she even turned. She expected an argument, but there was none, only certainty. "Orpah has left," Naomi said, as if that changed anything. "You should go too." But Ruth stepped closer instead, her voice calm, unwavering. Then came the vow, the one history would call duty, but Naomi knew better. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." The men were gone, but Ruth had stayed. Bethlehem was not kind to outsiders. She followed her mother-in-law, a Moabite, a widow, a burden. Whispers that filled the street. Naomi clenched her jaw and ignored them. But Ruth met their stares without flinching. She wasn't here for them. She was here for Naomi. Each night, when Ruth set down her grain, Naomi reached for her hand. Their fingers lingered. No words, but something deep, unspoken, real. Naomi's sacrifice. On this particular night, Naomi lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic breathing of Ruth beside her. The room was dark, save for the dying fire, casting flickering shadows along the walls. She exhaled, slow and deliberate, pressing a hand to her chest as if to quiet the ache growing there. Ruth needed security, a name, a future, things Naomi could not give her. And yet, the thought of sending Ruth away even for one night made her stomach churn. The choice was made. Boaz, one of her husband's relatives, was the answer. The only answer. She turned her head slightly, watching as Ruth shifted in her sleep. Her brow creased even in rest. Naomi swallowed against the lump in her throat. "Go to him," she whispered the next morning, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Ruth frowned, searching Naomi's face. "Is that what you want?" Naomi forced a nod. She did not trust her voice. That night, Naomi sat alone, unmoving, staring at the doorway long after Ruth had gone. The house felt hollow without her. The walls pressed in, the silence unbearable. She should have prayed, but she could not. Instead, she sat in the dark, waiting. Waiting for Ruth's footsteps, waiting for relief, waiting for the moment her heart would stop feeling like it was breaking. And in the silence, she realized this was her sacrifice. Ruth approached Boaz, her feet barely making a sound against the hard-packed earth. Naomi's words echoed in her mind, but they felt foreign, distant. The night was cool, the scent of grain heavy in the air, but her heart pounded in her chest. She hesitated before lying at his feet, a deep ache settling in her bones. When he stirred, confusion flickered across his face. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Ruth." The words barely escaped her lips. She was supposed to ask for redemption, security, a future, but all she wanted was to return to Naomi. But she knew she had no choice. She gathered her strength and did what Naomi had asked of her. Boaz was a man of honor, and he swore to do right by her. The wedding was grand, a joyous occasion, for everyone but them. Ruth stood before Boaz, dressed in soft linen, a veil obscuring her face. Naomi stood at a distance, unseen in the crowd, watching as Ruth was given to another. Their eyes met across the courtyard, just for a moment. A fleeting glance, a silent farewell. Boaz lifted Ruth's veil, smiling gently. She smiled back, but it did not reach her eyes. Naomi turned away. She had done what was necessary. Ruth was safe now. That was all that mattered. So why did it feel like a loss? The childbirth. Ruth screamed, her body writhing against the waves of pain crashing through her. Boaz's hand was firm in hers, but it was the wrong touch, the wrong presence. She barely felt him. Her lips parted, dry and trembling, and only one name slipped from them: Naomi. The midwives exchanged glances but said nothing. Outside, Naomi stood motionless, her hands clasped so tightly they ached, her breath shallow, uneven. Every cry from inside the room cut through her like a blade. She wanted to be there, wanted to soothe Ruth's damp forehead, whisper reassurances, hold her as she had in nights past. Then, piercing through the tension, a cry, thin, sharp, and alive. The room fell still for a moment before erupting in motion. The midwives laughed, voices warm with relief. Naomi only exhaled, her shoulders sagging as tears traced quiet paths down her face. The women called for her, beckoning her inside. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as they placed the swaddled infant in her arms. He was impossibly small, his tiny fingers curling against her chest as if he had always belonged there. Naomi looked down at the baby, then at Ruth, who lay spent and breathless on the bed, her eyes searching for something, someone. Their gazes met, and in that moment, nothing else existed. Naomi nodded. Yes, this child was theirs. The baby nestled between them. Naomi traced his tiny fingers, her heart full. Ruth watched her, something unspoken passing between them. "We made it," Ruth whispered. Naomi exhaled. "Yes, we did." Their hands found each other in the flickering light. No vows, no need for words. The years would fade, but their bond would not. Some relationships exist beyond definition. Some ties run deeper than history acknowledges, unspoken yet unmistakable. And perhaps, the Bible's most overlooked love story was never meant to be hidden, but was simply never given the words it deserved.